This is Dr. Iason Tzouriadis, Curator of European Edged Weapons at the Royal Armouries Museum in the UK, which houses a collection of thousands of iconic weapons from throughout history. And I'm your host, Dave Jewett, and today we're breaking down a variety of weapons from Dark Souls, as well as a very iconic helmet.
This is clearly inspired by one specific object, and I mean, I walk past it a couple times a week in the tournament gallery. Even in the museum here, I have heard people call this in the gallery, oh look, it's the Dark Souls helmet.
Oh look, it's the helmet from Dark Souls.
That's Henry VIII's horn helmet.
And I'm like, yeah, that's great. Master armourer Curator Schusenhofer made this in the early 16th century for you to call it the Dark Souls helmet. But
If you want more Dark Souls, you can find the extended edition of this episode over on our Patreon, link in the description below for that. But we hope you enjoyed this episode, and now without further ado, it's over to Iason.
I'm glad we're starting with this object, with a Lucerne Hammer. Is that right, Dave?
Yeah, that's right, the Lucerne.
Staff weapons are really my wheelhouse. I love them. However, from the get-go, I have to say how much annoyed I am because there's a staff weapon used with a shield. It's a fantasy game. I suspend my disbelief now. I'll try to keep that down for the rest of the video. That's an interesting one because, I mean, you have a hero using it, and it's a weapon that became popular, especially from towards the end, third and fourth quarters of the 15th century and in the first couple of decades of the 16th century. What I find interesting with this, I mean, yeah, some very dynamic movement. I'm looking forward to see, like in this video, how this is used in the game. But what I have here is an actual Lucerne Hammer. Now, there are different variations of this weapon, and usually in sources from the video, you can find different ways with which they describe different terms. You can find them as different regional versions of the word axe, even though there's no axe, annoyingly. You also get these variations where they're often called bec de corbin, raven's beak, because of the obvious beak on the back and so on. This one, of course, has a much smaller element compared to the other one I'm going to show you shortly. And you can see it's a multi-tool. Much like other poleaxes of the 15th and early 16th century, they're multi-tools. They can pierce, they can thrust, they can do all of these things. These come directly from Lucerne, from the Armoury of Lucerne, and they're occasionally are stamped and allegedly with an L right here. Most of these should come from the early mid-16th century. And dating those from the 16th century compared to those from the 15th century is done based on the variety of different elements they have on them, such as a quadrangular on triangular spike that becomes way more acute the later that you go, and this has to do with who they're used for. So I find amazing that these are used in Dark Souls. So this is, when you sent me the video for this, I was really happy to see that the opening weapon is something like this, because this has quite complex history, and staff weapons, I think, do not get enough love, neither in scholarship or in video games, if I'm honest. Usually you see them, I think, more in JRPGs, more commonly than what you get them in non-Japanese produced games, really, like fantasy games. How do you find using it in combat?
It's a tricky weapon to sort of master, because obviously the reach is such a huge advantage in all Souls-like games, when, damage is such a factor and they could be so punishing. But if you miss an attack, you'll notice that the character staggers. So when, if the weapon head clangs on the ground, the sort of momentum carries them. So you have to be careful when using it. And it's how the game sort of balances the extra reach and the advantage that affords. You have to be careful not to miss an attack, because otherwise you open yourself up to receiving more damage because you're in this staggered state.
I mean, this is something I do not like in games as well, because staff weapons, especially variations of the axe and so on, is meant to be something very dynamic. So I understand the whole mechanic, and I'm not saying that everything should adhere to our perception, or rather the reality of combat or what we know about it, but they would have been very dynamic weapons that you can use as a very big lever and deliver blows with all of its elements to strike against armor to try and pierce, pull, thrust, and so on. But of course, you would also thrust and strike with a bottom, which sometimes would have been fitted, as is in the game, with a metal shoe or a spike. But we have examples of them where they're not fitted with anything, and striking somebody even with a blunt, butt of a haft, it's still devastating.
It's funny that you called this weapon a multi-tool and also then said it's from Switzerland. They obviously have an affinity for that type of tool.
Of course. Like I would love to have a Swiss army folding halberd. In lack of that, I'm gonna take the Lucerne Hammer or a halberd, really. What we have next. So, what is this called in the game?
This is just called a Scythe in the game.
It's called a Scythe.
Yeah.
So I do find this entertaining. Again, my rage is unending because of the shield and that. I find it interesting that it's called a Scythe, probably because of the evocative big, shape. But this is not a Scythe. We have military scythes and so on. They were all things that were modified from scythes to become weapons. But what this is what is usually known as a bardiche. I'm not bringing it here because you can hide my face. It's so large. It's much lighter than what people anticipate. So the weight of this is not that much more than this. In fact, I think actually the Lucerne Hammer might be heavier. The bardiche, it has a big, impressive blade, and I think part of its purpose is to look as well the part. Obviously, this is a weapon optimized for slashing, cutting, and so on. And there's a lot of there's some debate about the little hammer that it has on the back. Now, if you see the whole weapon, because I don't think that the one that you have there has it. Not all of them do, but some do. The little hammer that people often ask us, what is it for? Because if you see the whole thing, the tip comes further back than the hammer. Therefore, you could not really strike with it. I think it's both for counterbalance as well as adding extra weight behind the blow to increase the centrifuge, if that makes sense. And I mean, the overall shape of the bardiche probably is something that could be a derivative of weapons that you see already from the 12th, 13th, and 14th century, like the guisarme and so on. And again, there's ongoing debate and research on this. But weapons like this appear in the 16th century, and you see them mostly in the 17th and the 18th century, Central and Eastern Europe especially. They're usually they're often associated with Russia, but you do have them in illustrations in other countries as well, as just like Holland, Hungary, and so on. And sometimes we have them in the 18th century of soldiers patrolling the city with these and guns, and they would have been using them as a stand for the gun, like sort of like a linstock to stand on here. And that gives us an idea as well as the illustrations of the actual length, which is again, as I said, a problem. And did you just cut a bull's behind with?
That's the armored fanged boar. It has a very specific weak point that you have to exploit. It's either luring it into fire or finding a gap in the armor, I think people would say.
That's a certain weak spot for most people.
Listen, you got to do what you got to do.
That's very visceral right there. Like, this is okay.
It's a hard life in the Undead Burg. You got to do what you got to do.
Again, I keep seeing you using that with a shield. I really cannot get over it, apparently. Do you ever use that just with no shield and with two hands? Okay, there you go. Fair enough.
And it's similar to the Lucerne. It has much more utility as a two-handed weapon. You get more range. You get more, both range, distance from your body, but also the advantage of much wider sweeps, being able to hit multiple enemies at once. I
have to admit to your viewers that, I mean, I guess as like most players of Dark Souls, I've played it a very long time ago, but I have had a very, very bad time playing it. And I died in this very spot a lot because I roamed here by accident when I was really not the appropriate level. Yeah, this part and the following bosses are a wall that a lot of new Dark Souls players will come up against. These weapons, these staff weapons, are quite popular in PvP as well because they have what people call a spin to win. Because you get the big spinning attack, and it's much harder to roll away from your enemy if they're covering basically 360 degrees with a big blade. I think the only PvP I played with a spinny weapon and, flaming the chat was probably World of Warcraft with a warrior.
Just whirlwind.
Yeah, but that's about it. But yeah, I like it. The big moves like a whirlwind, yeah, it shows great on here. But realistically, I think what the whirlwind represents have to do with the use of these big weapons, which rely on stepping and generating constant power. So you take a step and you change the direction of the blow, and you keep moving it. So you use the momentum of the weapon. But yeah, I like how different types of weapons that you often do not see in many RPG games or adventure games are somehow represented in Dark Souls. I know that you have these sort of grimdark rendition, but clearly people who designed this were inspired by, real life objects, as one would expect. So this one is an interesting one because, again, this falls outside the remit of what I usually study and do. So this is a ramdao. It's a Nepalese 18th or early 19th century type of sacrificial sword. Again, I might be completely misinformed on this, but as far as I know, these were not used in combat. These were ritualistic swords. I guess in the context of Dark Souls, if it's big and it can cut, they will use it to...
Well, the item description actually says it's a curved greatsword used in a mysterious ancient rite. So it is referring to the real-life history of the object, even to the point where if you attack an enemy, you get a little bit of health back. It says using occult energy, again, sort of playing on that idea that it's a weapon for sacrifice, that it's part of, maybe a religious ceremony or, something like that. It's using that bit of real-world history to flesh out the function in game.
That's very cool. I as I said before, I really appreciate that designers have clearly picked up bits and bobs from different cultures and objects, and they really created something unique. And I love. Sorry, I'm just taken back from this by the decoration on this, which is something that is meant to be maybe incised and inlaid or gilt, and it's gorgeous, and it definitely does carry that sort of feeling of decoration of what you get in the area there as well. It's gorgeous. I presume that the armor as well, it's something that you find in a similar context because it looks vaguely Asian.
Yeah, it's called the Eastern armor, and the character that that has it is said to have travelled from a Far East land.
Oh,
because
excellent.
it does not share any visual similarities with the other armor in Dark Souls. It's really contrasting against the other sort of knightly plate armor, but the game says that this is armor that's come from a land far away, and this person has brought it back.
We have a ramdao currently on display here at the Royal Armouries Museum above the Asian African Gallery, so people can see it on display to see what a real thing looks like. And I do have to stress, by the way, these were not used to sacrifice humans, in contrast to this one, which I presume that in Dark Souls, with no discrimination, you sacrifice everything on your path.
I have seen some examples from I think the Metropolitan Museum of Art has an example with that red inlay on the sort of rear of the weapon as well as the eye. I've seen that quite common, the eye motif.
Is it copper alloy then? Probably.
Well, I was reading that the ramdao it has the larger head to basically help with decapitating something. It's much more weight and force.
Yeah. If you handle it, a lot of well-designed edge weapons are meant to come alive in the hand, and you can really realize when something has either a specific use, like if it's deliberately front heavy, you really feel it. And some bad weapons hold that in the hand. Oh my God! This is some Lovecraftian horror, which I love. It's a mouth.
This is the gaping dragon.
I love whoever names these things must have a blast. I have to admit, aesthetically, this is not my favorite weapon in the game, but a lot of extra points for variety, as well as, adding the fluff about the sacrifice. And it's a great idea of expanding something. And this, of course, most of Dark Souls is pseudo-European, right? So I quite like that they get certain weapons that move outside that. And I know that they have things inspired by katanas and so on, but it's nice to see things that are not your usual suspects when it comes to Asian weaponry. Because, in all honesty, I cannot think of any other example where I've seen a Ramdal portrayed in pop culture, really.
If you want an even deeper dive into the weapons of Dark Souls, then be sure to check out the extended edition of this episode over on our Patreon. Our Patreon also has over 90 extended director's cut episodes from a variety of experts and even more Patreon exclusive content and EXP Discord access. Becoming an EXP patron helps to support the channel, allows us to bring in our wonderful experts, and lets us continue making cool content like this. But whether you join the Patreon or watch along here on YouTube, I want to say thank you for watching, and now I'll get back to the video.
Aye, Shemai, and good day to you. I'm Domhnall of Zena. I'm just, a peddler of sorts. I adore trinkets and oddities, so I trade for them.
Okay. I know what we're doing here.
You might recognize this.
Yeah. I walk past it a couple times a week in the tournament gallery. So can you tell me about this very zany character that you meet in a sewer wearing a very fancy helmet inspired by one of the most famous helmets in Arms and Armor Studies?
So this is Domhnall of Zena.
Yeah.
He's described as an adventurer from historical Zena, another place in the world of Dark Souls. He's a traveling merchant that's got quite an eclectic selection of different gear. And you first find him sitting at the end of a sewer, resplendent in gold and emerald green and medals. So he stands out quite a lot. But obviously the thing that stands out most is that helmet. His helmet, and he speaks Welsh. He's got a Welsh accent. Says, "Hey, how goes it?" in Welsh.
Aye, Shemai, and good day to you.
I'm like, so he's immediately one of my top favourite characters of Dark Souls.
Fantastic. I mean, I love how, even with the exception of the helmet, I love how garish he looks compared to other things. But even though he is ostentatious and somewhat colourful, I think aesthetically he still fits very well here. Might be the horns and the overall, grotesque appearance, but overall he looks great. So it's very iconic because, in contrast to other objects we've seen this far, this is clearly inspired by one specific object. And I mean, even in the museum here, I have heard people call this in the gallery, "Oh, look, it's the Dark Souls helmet."
Oh, look, it's the helmet from Dark Souls.
That's Henry VIII's horn helmet.
And I'm like, yeah, that's great. Master armourer Curator Schusenhofer made this in the early 16th century for you to call it the Dark Souls helmet. But anyway, yeah, this is a very famous helmet. It's known as the Horn Helmet. It's the logo as well of the Royal Armouries Museum. It was made for Henry VIII, King of England, and it was part of a gift armour, a gift from Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I. And unfortunately, only the helmet survives. And now it was, as I said, it was made by the court armourer of Maximilian's, Konrad Schusenhofer. He started making it in 1511, and it was sent, I think, in 1514. Again, armour not my thing. You have to excuse my discrepancy with this, but it's a famous object. A lot of information for it is out there. What makes this exceptional compared to other things we've seen this far, but even when we're looking at armour, is that we have so much information about it. And this is the exception, really, when we're looking at arms and armour. People think that, yeah, we know everything about every sword. We get often very specific questions. Who used this, who wore that? And even with many armours, we do not have, all of that information. There's very good documentation on it, and some of the most prominent scholars of arms and armour have looked at it, including Claude Blair. He wrote what is considered to be still the reference work on European armour, and he was the keeper of metalwork at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. Now, the figure itself it's quite interesting because people, of course, stand in its grotesque appearance. When you see the actual helmet itself, and I think it imitates it, well, not so closely, but to a decent extent, with this weird grin, we have this little grill to show the teeth. The actual helmet itself has stubble, like a snotty nose dripping a little bit in metal. And of course you have the spectacles and you have the horns as well. the figure itself really and the different features of it are the most puzzling things of this. Sometimes they say that the figure itself is Maximilian. The most common association in bibliography is with that of Will Somers, who was the fool of Henry VIII. However, all of these things sort of have mostly been they have been disputed. The features as well, like, because people think that the spectacles are something very rare and anachronistic. In fact, the type of spectacle that the helmet is wearing is something that was very common in the periods that it was made. In the 16th century, you do have these type of spectacles in the Low Countries a lot, and as well as in Germany. And we have imagery of fools at the time often wearing spectacles, and I think that's where there was this overlap on trying to interpret the helmet.
So if the spectacles are something that was common with fools, then what are they sort of representing on such like an ornate helmet?
I think this is only one reading, because they're often also portrayed in depictions of scholars as well of the period. So my answer is overall about this is that I do not know. The other feature about this that is often talked about, and is the most sort of glaring difference compared to the physical object, is the shape of the horns. Because if you look at the horns of the horn helmet, they curl inwards.
Well, the item description in game says that the two horns are believed to symbolize wisdom, and the helmet's called Helm of the Wise. So I always assumed that the glasses motif was another addition to that title, Wisdom Glasses.
So again, the horns have been a subject of very long debates, and again, I will simply replicate some of the opinions that colleagues of mine, much wiser on the topic of armour, have said in the past. They're very well made in the horn helmet themselves, and they were finely etched as well. And in the original form, the horns themselves were probably gilt, so they would look magnificent. The whole thing would look impressive. It looks simultaneously grotesque and impressive, and it demonstrates all of these decorative techniques. It's like much like certain other bits of arms and armor, they are a surviving piece that is like a testament to artistry of the period, and you can have a whole art history lesson based on them. The helmets as well, they're very crudely attached to the horn helmet that we have here in the museum, and there are many evidence that suggests that the horns did not belong, at least originally, with the helmet as it was made. This also has to do with an initial assessment of what they represent. You say that in this they represent wisdom. An initial reading, I believe, which Claude Blair did. Before Claude Blair, and other scholars really associated the horns with the idea of the cuckold, which would definitely make it a very inappropriate gift in the period from, Emperor Maximilian to a king. So overall, a very interesting object with a complex history, and what is fascinating is that it still raises questions, even though we have a disproportionate amount of information about it compared to other bits of arms and armor. And I think there's an upcoming volume, in fact, that the Royal Armouries will be releasing about it in the future. But there's still a lot of research about it.
One of the things that I love about, I think this helmet in particular, but sort of games that use history as a jumping off point in general, is that people see this helmet, they are intrigued by its unique design, and then might go away and investigate sort of where that's come from, and then come across the horn helmet and the Royal Armouries, and it becomes a platform to start learning more about real history. And that's my favorite thing about like games and movies, when it sort of propels a person, makes them feel passionate about something, engaged in something, and they learn about the real history that might have informed some of these design decisions. Like that's always really cool to see.
I fully agree. It's fascinating, and it's a constant discussion that we have here with visitors, and I love hearing this in the galleries, is people that do not really expect how fantastical things look, because there's that expectation of the seriousness of certain things and how austere weapons and armor looks because of how they've been reproduced in earlier popular depictions of them in different art forms. And the reality is that a lot of them, which have been looked, especially in their original form, very bright, there is a lot of color, and they have some insane designs. And the most classic design I can think of it's the horn helmet. People think this is a fantastical helmet from a fantasy game. This belongs to Dark Souls more than it belongs to reality, according to some people. The rapier and the dagger. I mean, I'm just making some space because I'll bring more objects.
So this is specifically Ricard's rapier.
Ricard, okay.
And Ricard was a sort of prince who lost himself and became undead.
Interesting. I'll explain why. Because I think it's completely coincidental based on the things that I have brought here today. Because I quite like this. Again, when it comes to the pseudo-historical aspect, a bit all over the place, of course. You know, you have loads of quite heavy plate armor that's a bit of everything, and then rapier and dagger. So the swords of this type you start getting from the third quarter of the 16th century. The blade is a bit more slender. People think that rapiers are very light and flimsy. Some later ones are, some earlier ones are very robust and heavy, and I would say some early rapiers weigh even more than 200 swords. So you better be doing those forearm exercises. We have rapiers in the collection that look beautiful, like those, that set that you have there looks, gilt. We have some of those on display, but what I want to bring here because of them, because you have preempted me with these, are these two. I hope you can see them. Because stylistically, this is a rapier and dagger. We do not know if they were designed to be specifically together, but aesthetically, they are likely designed to be used en suite. These come from Saxony, and they were likely used by the personal guard of the Elector of Saxony. That's why the princely connection that you said as well. Sure, not the Elector's own rapier and dagger, but they were really well made. And the patina on them as well. I know we have, maybe it's not the opposite, but it's a very different type of decoration. You have gilts and, like some incised and decorated hilts there. Yeah, whereas the hilt I have here, in these would have been blued. So not in a bright blue, but having a very nice blue hue. In Ricard's rapier here, okay, this is as good as it gets in a video game, I guess, from that period, but it's still quite impressive seeing this level of detail. It's important to remember that arms and armor were often symbols of status. There were ways of displaying one's status. And because the hilt is a lot of what people would see when it comes to rapiers, when it was in a sheath, because you carry it around, it becomes also an accessory. It becomes something as a visual representation of you. And if you say that this chap, Ricard, was a prince, yeah, that makes sense. Because when you see the rapiers of princes that survive now in museums all over the world, there's not that many of them, but those that exist, some of them look very impressive and very heavily decorated. And I think it had to do with the aesthetical preference of each of those people. Some are very ostentatious, some are much plainer because some people, have taste. But yeah, it's so the rapiers become more of a thing when sword production increases in the 16th century, and they're used in the military capacity. They're used in a non-military capacity when the sort of martial culture doesn't spill out because it exists, but it becomes more augmented in a social context. So you have people carrying these things that are they're not in the military, and they carry them in cities. Usually, they would be people initially of a certain status, but then wealthy citizens and so on, but then these things are carried more and more by more people because they become more accessible as well. They become cheaper to produce, easy to buy, and then a necessary tool for the gentlemen of the 16th and then later the 17th century. The dagger itself, the one that I have here, if you see it, it's quite heavy. Usually you hear these being described to as left hand or offhand or parrying daggers. I prefer using the term accompanying dagger for something like this that could have been used with a rapier. The truth is you can use the dagger on its own, but its size and weight is because you're going to be able to parry other weapons with it. Don't mark me wrong, this would be a formidable weapon on its own. This is quite heavy as well. And you need this sort of presence to be able to parry something. And what I quite like is that on this plane, I don't know if you can see it, that the quillons tilt. So essentially they create this sort of blade catcher on the outside of the hand where this ring sits as well.
It's funny you call it an accompanying dagger, because similarly in game you can attack with it, but its purpose really is to parry, to be, you know, that secondary weapon. Because the advantage it affords you is in Dark Souls there is like a parry window. So if you knock a weapon aside with a shield, that's a short parry window. These parry weapons extend that and make it much easier to parry a blow.
I get that. I think if you look at it from a historic context, if you look at fencing treatises from the 16th and the 17th century, where they deal with sword and dagger, usually it's rapier and dagger, but there are earlier sources that deal with single-handed sword and dagger. There are things you can do to parry and attack with either of them. You can parry or protect yourself, because a parry is not always an active thing. You can protect yourself with the sword or the dagger and attack with the other, regardless. So it's like more like boxing. And in different treatises, you can either lead with one or the other, if that makes sense. You know, like you don't start always with the rapier on the front. Sometimes you can start with the dagger. But I quite like it. This fight, what I'm seeing in this video, it looks quite dynamic. The only thing I would say, and I wish, but again, this changed only, I guess, in later games in general, is that depending on the weapon you hold, it would be nicer if you change your stance, because in this one, you just stand like a bit very rigidly down, you know what I mean? When you move, it's very nice and dynamic, and I quite like that. Oh, this is the beginning.
Yeah, Filing Shrine. I had enough of the crestfallen warrior.
Does he, like, he gives you appearing, isn't he? He's the tutorial.
Yeah, every single Souls game, there is a guy who is crestfallen, sitting near the fire.
Yeah.
Being a bit of a downer.
Oh no, like in why would that be in Dark Souls? Probably to the next player.
To be fair, I think if I ended up in Dark Souls, I'd be miserable.
I think you'd be dead, but perfectly honest, but.
Thank you all for watching. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure you like the video if you did and subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos featuring Iason. As always, a massive shout out to all of our wonderful supporters over on the EXP Patreon who allow us to make cool content like this. Leave any thoughts you may have in the comment section below. But until next episode, thank you again for watching and I'll see you very soon.